So they're like, okay, so yeah, they're replacing the light source, simply all of that.
Good, wonderful, sweet. Everybody excited for Artemis?
Yep.
I know I am. How cool is that? If we haven't met yet, my name is Jonathan Fusel. I'm the current president of the Astronomy Club of Tulsa. I think I see a few new faces, so welcome if this is your first night with us. We've got kind of a big meeting. We've got a lot to kind of get through and talk about. We have a few introductory presentations, and we have a really cool guest speaker, Mr. David Kent, that I'll tell you a little bit more about here in a second. But let's go ahead and go to the next slide, which I know everybody's super pumped about because I know I'm pumped about it. Right now is currently Artemis 2 is at its outward bound transit to the moon, and in a few days we will be entering lunar orbit. Look at that, for the first time in I believe it's 53 years. So it's pretty cool that we're finally going back. I'm excited. Dan, if you were here earlier, Dan had the live stream up that we were able to see the crew actually move around in the cabin, and I was talking to a few people and noting just how much more spacious it seems inside the cabin compared to the Apollo programs. But yes, so we are a few more days until we get to the moon, and then we'll be doing a lunar flyby, which is going to be super cool. I'm excited to see all the different craters, all the different valleys, all the different shadows. Yeah, this is going to be a really cool mission to continue to see unfold over the next few days. But my favorite part so far has been this. I don't know if anybody has seen this recently. I think they might have posted this early this morning. Oh man, look at that photo. This is a photo was taken by, I believe it was Commander Reed. And the original photo was actually inverted, and I was looking at it, and I was like, what continent is this? But if you notice, here's Africa. All right, Europe was going to be up here. You can kind of make out South America over here. And then if you're looking close, really, really close, look at that. You can see the auroras, the northern and southern auroras. And this right here, we call zodial light. This is, I don't know how great explanation it would be, almost like residual light coming off of Earth. You're able to see it in very, very dark skies. And so it is super cool. This is, I think this is arguably one of my favorite photos of the planet Earth that I've seen in a long time. But yeah, super cool. It's super exciting to be in the field and, you know, learn all you can about this. And it's just exciting times in general, right? It's, I'm excited for the future of the spaceflight program at NASA. Yes, sir. That's what I was thinking too. I do. So Skip was asking about this dot right here in the sky. If it was Venus, I believe it actually is Venus. I would have to confirm, but I do believe that it is Venus in the background. So not only one planet, you got two planets. And so, yeah, it's really cool because I can't think of another photo that actually features two planets like this. Is it?
During the feed, the Orion at one point was pointed towards the moon and the Earth was behind it. That's the moon should actually be behind the Earth.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like shot behind the Earth.
Okay, so they're talking about how this is more than likely probably going to be a planet, and that if it were the moon, it would basically be bigger and brighter, which I would probably tend to agree with. Okay, on to the.
Oh, sorry, that's me.
Oh,
Sorry, go for it.
On to the rest of it. So April, we kind of have a packed month. Obviously, tonight's meeting, Friday, April 10th. Crystal Ray's, she discussed doing a movie night, which we'll get to here in just a second. But going to see Project Hail Mary. How many of you have already seen Project Hail Mary? Okay, how many want to go see it again? Okay, sweet. So we'll get to that here in just a second. April 11th, we have our guests and members night out at the observatory. If you have not been to the guest night out at our observatory, please come out. We would love to have you. We'd love to get you behind a telescope and kind of get you situated on what's what in the night sky. Yeah, come out. It's a really fun time. April 17th, we have members only observing night. April 24th, this is going to kind of be a big night for us. We're partnering with the Guthrie Green downtown. They have invited us to their Interstellar viewing night. So they're putting on the movie Interstellar from 2014 with not Matt Damon. Well, I guess it is Matt Damon. He's one of the characters, but
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey. Thank you. It's a really cool movie, and we're going to be there showing people planets, anything we can actually see from downtown. I think it's a half moon, quarter moon, something like that. Don't quote me on that though. But we'll be there with telescopes. So if you're interested in that, please, we'd love to have you there. We're going to be setting up around 7 o'clock. I think the viewing goes until about 10:30, so quite a while. If you're interested, you can email me or just show up. We'd love to have the extra hands. And then April 25th, the following night, we have Case Community Center and International Astronomy Day. So kind of back-to-back heavy nights. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of outreach. I expect there to be a lot of, hopefully, new members after these 2 nights. Same thing, if you're interested, send us an email or just show up with your telescope, and we'd love to have you and get you plugged in. All right, in May, we'll have our last meeting of the semester. And then May 1st, May 8th, we'll be doing guest members night at the observatory. Friday, May 17th, members only night. And then May 23rd, we're back at Hunter Park. I don't know how many of you were at the Hunter Park event, but it was huge. We had tons of people show up. And unfortunately, it was cloudy, so we had a lot of very optimistic people show up. But regardless, it was a great night. I know a few people got connected, a few people got plugged in. It's great to see it. I love to see it. And let's just keep that momentum going. All right, a few things. Sorry, I'm going to try and run through this a little faster. So the observatory, we got somebody to come out and finally kind of brush hog the northern, western, and southern perimeter. So now we can finally see past all the brush. If you have been out there recently, some of the brush was as tall as me. And then we actually had a recent work day, was that on 28th? We went back out there, trimmed up the edges, made it looking all nice and pretty. So now we can actually see stuff on the horizon. We also installed, yep, there's us. There's a little team that we had out there. Let's see. There we go. We also installed a nice new TV that we can actually feed the telescope to this TV. So the telescope up in the dome, we put a camera in it. And that camera we can now live feed to this TV to people that are down in the classroom. So now we can have people up in the dome, which is great, seeing the telescope, but then people down in the classroom actually seeing what we're seeing through the telescope. And so this is going to be a great little addition to what we're already doing. We're going to put, advertisements for what we're doing around town, different events, any astrophotography. If you have any, photos that you've taken and you'd love for us to feature it, send it to us, and we're going to try and get that going all the time as just kind of a background when we have guests out there. This one I put in so you guys can kind of see how we've cleared it. That's me in the background for reference. That's about how tall all the brush was all around. So we've had quite a successful workday, if I say so myself. And then we kind of divided into 3 teams. We were doing the groundskeeping, we were doing the TV installation, and then a few of us were up in the dome as well, making sure everything was working properly, tightening things that needed to be tightened, testing some of the gearing. Mr. Dana was our lead brain on that. He's amazing. And then, we're plugging right along with all of our little upgrades to turning 90. For those of you who don't know, we are currently on the road to the club to turning 90 in next year. So we've been around for almost 100 years. It's going to be a big to-do. We're talking, I want hundreds of people at our 90th anniversary, food trucks, the whole 9 yards. But that's in the works. We'll get to that. There we go. And then online, we have seen an explosion online since we've kind of been more involved on Facebook and Instagram. I believe there was one night after a Case Community Center event, Scott Bratt, who is kind of heading up our Facebook, said that we had a jump in like 30,000 people, which is crazy, who visited our page. I know the Instagram has been growing like crazy. It seems like every day we have 3, 4, 5 followers. So we're gaining some ground in that regard. I just have to say to you all who are part of the club and have been part of the club and continue to invest in it, keep it up. This is what it's all about. We love to see it grow. So let's just keep it growing. With that, this is somebody I want to introduce to you that we recently gave a telescope away to. We've been liquidating some of our telescopes, and this is Miss Bud and her dad, Scott. They have, Scott's awesome. He works EMS 6 days a week, and Bud is absolutely enamored with all things astronomy. I don't know if you can tell, but she has 2 necklaces on. One is Earth and one is the Mars. Same with her bracelet. She has like a bracelet that has all the planets in the solar system. She has all these different trackers on her phone. She told me that she likes to lean out the car door going 60 miles an hour, taking astrophotography photos. And so I was like, please don't do that. Just, preferably stand still and do that. But yes, we gave her this nice little Orion telescope. And last I heard, she was doing great with it. And so we're excited to see that. The other thing is that we have a member who's been a member with us for about a year now, Connor Mays. This is his newborn daughter, brand new member to the club, Miss Presley. And this was taken about a month ago, and Presley's doing great, so we welcome her to the club. The last thing, Miss Roll is coming up. I believe we're meeting in St. Charles, Missouri. Let's see. Yep, St. Charles County, Missouri. It's going to be June 26th to June 28th. I believe registration is open. So if you're interested in astronomy, astrophotography, telescopes, anything like that, definitely go onto the website, sign up. This is run by the, I don't remember which astronomy club runs this, but I think it's the Southern Missouri Astronomy Club. Oh, okay. And yeah, it's going to be a great night, a great weekend. I'll be there speaking on Sunday, I believe. I'm running one of the youth events. And so, yes, I'd love to see you there. We're going to make a great, impact on the youth and people that are there. I want them to see that our club is growing and thriving and dynamic. And I'm really excited for this. I'm excited for the energy that we're going to bring to it. And then lastly, Dan, do you mind raising the lights real quick? We're going to be doing club movie night. For those of you who are interested, can I see a quick raise of hands for people that would be interested on doing this? It's going to be Friday, April 10th at 6:45. Okay, quite a few. All right. If you are interested, come find me after the meeting, and I'll get you guys signed up. It's going to be discounted, so tickets will only be $5 a pop, which is going to be great. We can either do Cash App, or Venmo. Once we get there, we can either just exchange or whatever the case is. But they're giving us a nice group rate for if we have at least a minimum of 20 people. So I think I saw right around 20 hands be raised. So sweet. That'll be great. Like I said, come find me after the meeting. We'll get you signed up. All right. And let's get on with tonight's program. Sorry, I know that was a lot to go through. We didn't meet last month because of the tornado warnings. But now I would like to introduce Mr. Ron Dunn as he introduces himself to the club. So everybody give a big hand for Mr. Ron.
Okay, testing, yes, I am. Hello, everybody. How the heck are you? You gotta be better than me. Well, I am mobilely challenged. Have been that since a big back operation 2 years ago. So, about a little more than a year ago, having moved here, well, I'm back up. Born in Kansas City, raised in southwest Kansas, very dusty out there when the wind blows, which is always. You'll know when you've reached that part of the Oklahoma Panhandle, because I was only 3 miles from the Oklahoma Panhandle. Those trees all lean this way because the south wind, while they're growing, takes over and positions them in that position. Anyway, moving around along. My career was basically enhanced, started, kicked off by a ride that a guy gave me in his airplane when I was 16. And that pretty much sandwiched me. From then on, all I wanted to be was a pilot. And so when I was 17 years old, I bought an airplane. Didn't have a car. With an airplane, I didn't need one. I had friends all over the place that wanted me to ride. Anyway, my life's vocation and basically my life's hobby involved aviation. And that was good up until moved to Broken Arrow about 30, 40 years ago to start work for Flight Safety International. Love the company, love the work so much that I stayed there for 30 years. Retired about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Time quickly passes by. Had a back operation, my third major, a little over 2 years ago. That ended my aviation hobby and aviation. I had over 2,000 hours in an airplane. I have a commercial license, multi-engine instructor, and instrument ratings. And my hobby was building airplanes. I built 2 different airplanes that I flew to Oshkosh, Wisconsin 10 times over 10 years. I sold all the airplanes, sold my house, hangar, the whole bit, moved to Jinx, Oklahoma, and moved in with my son and his family. And I decided, well, I'm not going to be flying, although I'm so close to the Riverside Airport. What's my appetite? But anyway, I said, what else can I do? Well, I've always had a kind of a back burner yearning for astronomy. That's what I'll do is astronomy. So about a year and 3 months, 4 months ago, I bought a Celestron 9.25-inch SCT. What a big outfit that was. I couldn't move it. My son had to carry it. The fact is, I couldn't even stand there and look at anything through it. So that wasn't going to work. A astronomy dealer listened to my story and said, son, what you need is a smart telescope. Hell, I've never even heard of a smart telescope. How smart does that guy have to be to run a smart telescope, I wondered. Anyway, some research, and I immediately bought a S50, C-Star S50. Oh man, what a deal. I could sit on my patio and take pictures of the objects in the sky. Man, oh man, I visited with John Lamb, and he was a S50 expert in my eyes, and he got me started. But then I got interested in bigger and better things. The next thing was the origin, celestron origin, which is a 6-inch Raza with camera. And I spent the next several months doing nothing but spending outside, taking from the patio, taking pictures of deep sky objects. As a matter of fact, I've got several on Astronomy right now. And then, after a while, I decided it would be good if I had a refractor. So I bought a 4.2-inch Ascar refractor. And of course, you need a camera angle adjuster. You need a electronic focus adjuster. You need a camera. And I have been dipping into my life savings pretty heavily here lately. I mean, and I got carried away. I now have 4 telescopes. My good friend Don Bradford here has been a tremendous help in getting me going in the right direction and helping me. Without him, I wouldn't be near as far along as I am now. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to use a pointer. And Dan, are you ready to click on some of those pictures?
Yes, sir.
I'll sit down and I'll talk and point. If you'll fire up number 1. This is my origin, my celestron origin. 6-inch reflector. There's an extra item. That's a wedge, which allows me to operate the telescope in an equilateral mount formation. Ready? Next, please. And there it is, permanently set in my backyard observatory with a 95-pound dog and a 3-pound cat. Next. And there the same picture is. You see it's semi-permanently mounted in the backyard. I'll only move it on the dire threat of a tornado. And there it is with a snow cap. By the way, those are wonderful covers. They're called Telegizmo covers. All right, next one. And this is the picture that I took recently that John was gracious enough to put on the cover of our newsletter. Back up, just wanted something I wanted to show. This is the flipper that operates to give me my darks and my flats. And of course, this is my mount. This is my camera. This is my turret. On the other side is the focuser. Anyway, I'm having a ball learning how to run that thing. Next, please. And this is a real observatory. I mean, this is the entrance to a real observatory. And the people that get into this observatory have to stoop over to get in there. In my case, it wasn't much. I'm stooped over pretty good to start with. But anyway, you have to stoop over to get in. Next slide, please. And the dome is rotated by this gizmo here that drives this thing here. Next one, please. And there is our man of the hour. That is Tim Gilliland. And this is inside his observatory. And that is a I think a 14 inch. Is this right, Don? 14 inch. Anyway, 11 to 14 inch Celestron SCT. It is a big one. Next one, please. This is a better shot of Tim in his observatory explaining all about it. Next one, and that's my buddy Don, who drove me out there to meet him, to meet Tim. Anyway, next one. And this is the observatory in the woods just next to his house, where his house is off to the right. The steps are up, and in through that 4-inch or 4-foot doorway. It is an amazing observatory built by an equally amazing man who also built a good portion of his house that's next to it. Man, I meet some amazing people in my days. Anyway, that's kind of the tour that of me, and I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Brad Young now for a observing in April presentation.
Thank you. We'll try to get through this one pretty quickly. Observing in April. The first thing, of course, we've talked about this a little bit, but the Artemis 2 capsule is going back to the moon now that I'm old. So the last time we went to the moon, I think I was 8. I remember it distinctly. We went over to a friend's house and watched it. And my great-grandmother, who was taking care of me, complained bitterly the entire time that it had interrupted her soap operas. So I do remember that. It's been a while. As far as seeing the capsule, I'm afraid our viewing opportunities from Tulsa are in a word poor. It's in the early morning. It's near the moon, obviously, low in the south-southeast. If you want to try, you can go to the JPL Horizon site for positions, and it'll give you an ephemeris, which is a list of positions at each time, and the time step that you say, like 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, and you can try to find it. I would say the chances of us seeing it here in Tulsa are slim to none, especially now that they're on their way to the moon. Maybe when they come back, you could try again, but you're going to face the same challenges. Next. This is an image or several images that I took from Perth, Australia. It was much higher there. I actually went over, there's another set that's on Facebook where it was just about overhead, just before dawn, where it's moving much faster and it's a little brighter. I also think I posted it to the Astronomy Club's Facebook page if you are into that. But anyway, I was able to image it, and it is up there and right where it's supposed to be. So everything is going very well. Next. Okay, comets. You'll never guess what I'm going to say about comets. It seems like it's pretty repetitive, but we'll go ahead and talk about it next. Comet C2025R3 Pan-STARRS is available, if you want to say that, in the morning sky, early morning sky, low in the east, just before dawn. Even though it's listed at magnitude 7, if you're familiar with the spring morning sky, we have a very poor ecliptic angle. This comet is actually just a little bit west of the square of Pegasus. I haven't tried to look for it yet, but just from the angles and the twilight involved, I would say it's going to be a difficult one to see. If you do get up and try to look at it, I kind of disparage Mercury later, but Mercury is having a morning elongation, so you might try to see that too while you're up. But everything in the morning sky, which includes most of the planets right now, is going to be very low and hard to see in the morning. Next. Comet MAPS, which was kind of the one everybody was really hoping about, it's entered the SOHO, which is the Solar Observatory's field of view now. And from what they can see, it looks very small, and it looks like it's going to be one of those ones that just doesn't survive its passage by the sun. So For instance, this gentleman, King Dang of the Lowell Observatory, says he's pessimistic. So if the comet guys who are always saying this is going to be the comet of the century are pessimistic, might not be a good opportunity for us. Okay, next. Other things to see instead, assuming the tornadoes don't scare you, planets, Jupiter still rules the evening. Uranus is losing to the sunset. It's west of Jupiter, so it's much lower. Venus passes the Pleiades and Hyades, the two cool clusters in Taurus, later this month, and it'll actually be fairly near the crescent moon, so you might look for that. I believe that's around the 20th or 21st. Like I said before, all the other planets are mostly lost in the morning glare. Next. Pluto is still there. I was worried about it, I guess you'd say. But I'm actually trying to image it for a program I'm working on. And I think my pointer's working quite right. Oh, there we go. So this mess of symbols right here, all of these boxes are known asteroids, and Pluto shows up on there, and I sort of overdid it here with trying to highlight it, but that black spot right in the middle is actually Pluto. It's getting very faint though. It's magnitude 15.7. We had the opportunity when I was younger to see it at about magnitude 12 and a half. It was much higher in the sky. Unfortunately, things have changed. It's low and dimmer, and it's just heading out. It's kind of past its prime, but if you have a big telescope or access to a camera, you might be able to still get it. Okay? The gist is this is the month for deep sky observation. This is a picture I took of M101 with my C star, and I would like to just interject real quick about smart telescopes. I put off doing anything like that until Christmas. Got a C star, S50. Been extremely amazed with it, and I think, especially since more and more people are getting them, this might be a time to see if you can get some of the galaxies that you might have had a hard time seeing or imaging in the realm of galaxies, which is coming up this month. This is sort of the big month for the Virgo group of galaxies. And so once the moon's gone, if you've got a smart telescope or any telescope, now's the time to look for galaxies. And next. And there is actually a new Astronomical League challenge. It has to do with M102, Messier's unknown journey. And there's two parts to this. One is we just saw an image of an M101, and most catalogs list M101 as M102, or they have a separate NGC, a smaller, dimmer galaxy that they list as M102. There's a lot of consternation about that. And so this is an experiment, I guess you'd say, in trying to figure out which one you might have meant by looking at the ones around it, imaging them or seeing them visually and sketching them. And if you want to do that, you can look it up on the Astronomical League website. Just Google Astronomical League. And just to let you know, the deadline for submission is July 31st, which is kind of the end of the season anyway. And you do have to do an outreach portion of that, which can simply be telling us here what you saw. It really is that it could be a big deal. If you need more information about that, be sure to catch me. And I think that's the last slide. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ed. All right. So our guest speaker tonight is Mr. David J. Ken. David is a Abraham Lincoln historian, former scientist, and avid road tripper. He is the immediate past president of the Lincoln Group of the District of Columbia, on the board of directors of the Abraham Lincoln Institute, and the board of advisors for the Lincoln Forum. He's a frequent speaker on Abraham Lincoln topics and served as master of ceremonies for the Lincoln Memorial Centennial Program in 2022. David has won numerous awards both for his scientific work and as an Abraham Lincoln historian. He has written several books, including Lincoln, The Fire of Genius, How Abraham Lincoln's commitment to science and technology helped modernize America. His newest book is Lincoln in New England, In Search of His Forgotten Tours. I will turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. And I can safely say, after seeing that presentation about Artemis, I have never given a Lincoln presentation while there were humans on a mission around the moon. But I can also say this is the first time you've heard a lecture about Abraham Lincoln sitting in a planetarium. So I guess we're even. Okay, I'm going to share my screen so you can see my presentation, and hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'm going to talk about Lincoln and astronomy. And as Jonathan mentioned, I'm actually a former scientist. I got my degrees in science, and I worked in science for 30 years, both in the United States and several years in Europe, and basically was a scientist and regulatory scientist at the end. Now, I've always, during that time, during that whole career, I was also a Lincoln scholar on the side, part-time. And about 15 years ago, I decided, I don't want to do the science anymore. I want to focus in on Lincoln and write books. So, of course, the first book I wrote was about a scientist, Nikola Tesla, and I wrote about Thomas Edison. And then finally, I got to Lincoln with this Lincoln, the Man Who Saved America. And those earlier three were all like very heavy on graphics and pictures. So they really appeal to a younger crowd, teenagers, early 20s. Then I got and finally wrote the book that I really, really wanted to write this whole time, which was Lincoln, the Fire of Genius, this yellowish book, which looked at Lincoln's interest in his commitment to science and technology. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight about astronomy is in that book. Not all of it. There's some other things I'm going to talk about. And of course, my newest book just came out, so I have to point out that, Lincoln went to New England twice. And the first time he was a sitting congressman, and he really learned how to be Lincoln. And the second time, it was right after Cooper Union, just before he was nominated for the presidency. And it really helped make him president. So that's the premise of that book. But tonight, I'm here to talk about Lincoln and astronomy. Get to the next slide. So, the first question I always get asked about science and Lincoln and astronomy is going to be the same. It's like, what did Lincoln know about science and technology and astronomy? The guy was a farmer. He grew up on the frontier in northern Kentucky. And there's no science there. The guy hardly had any education. So he couldn't possibly understand any of this stuff, right? Except there were a lot of new developments, technological developments going on in the first half of the 1800s. And because almost most people still worked on the farm or had something to do with farming, a lot of those technology developments were on the farm. So Lincoln watched from, as a little kid with a little wooden mortar board for plow, and then cast iron with replaceable parts, and then this John Deere steel plow. But there were also things like mechanical reapers to harvest the land, and some other things. And eventually, later, were things like steam plows, things like that. So there was a lot going on. And then farming itself is the science of agronomy. You don't just throw seeds out, come back in 6 months, and you have your crop. You have to understand how to prepare the soil, know about soil nutrition, hydrology, all of these different things in order to grow crops. And then when Lincoln and Lincoln's family moves from northern Kentucky to southern Indiana, they move into an area that Lincoln says is an unbroken forest. Well, an unbroken forest is not really very conducive to growing crops. So you have to get the trees out of the way. So we learned forest ecology. There are big and small trees, but there are also trees with very deep roots, tap roots, and very shallow roots, which affects how they can come out of the ground. There's also hardwoods and softwoods and wet trees and dry trees. There's very tall trees with very few branches close to the ground. And then there are trees that branch out very large from the ground. And all of those things affect how you get it out of there so you can plant, but also what you can use it for. You didn't throw these things away. Some you use for the fireplace, some you use for fence rails, and some you use for the log cabin. Now, the log cabin itself, again, you don't just throw trees in a pile and live in it. You have to know which trees to pick and how to put them in place so that they don't leak. So there's civil engineering involved. And there's a lot of other aspects of scientific aspects to the farming life and living. And just living that life, you learn it. So that was passed down through his parents and their parents. Now, but he also, though, he did have some formal schooling, not a lot. I mean, he admits in an autobiography he wrote just before he ran for president, he said, the totality of my formal schooling amounts to less than 1 year. So 1 year of formal schooling spread out over about 21 years. So a little bit here, a little bit there, and then he would have long stretches where he wasn't going to school. And he says, I learned reading, writing, and ciphering to the rule of three. Well, rule of three is math, ciphering is math, and rule of three is a simple ratio, A over B equals C over X, where you know what the numbers are for A, B, and C, and you have to solve for X. When you look at the books he studied, and you look at, this is a 1 page from a sum book that he had. We have about 12 pages of that book, which is originally 100 pages. You can see that the math was not just 1 + 1 = 2. It was a little bit higher order than that. We do long division and then back calculate it to prove it. There wasn't just a single rule of three. There was a double rule of three and an inverse rule of three. There was also learning discount rate calculations, interest rate calculations. There were conversions from British weights and measures to American weights and measures, and British currency to American currency. So it actually was fairly complicated. I mean, he was not doing calculus. So we know that much. So when he finally gets out on his own, he's around 22, he finally leaves the family and goes out on his own. And he moves to New Salem, which is in more or less central Illinois. And he's a store clerk and a postmaster. And those he's using the rule of three, he's using all these calculations and conversions. So he's getting some of this math practice in. But he also becomes a surveyor. And as a surveyor, it's not just you look through the compass like in the statue and stretch out a chain. He says, I had to study the surveying books and the surveying manuals. And when you look at those, there were a lot of math, including geometry. And then later on, he teaches himself Euclid geometry and trigonometry, the science of angles, sines, cosines, and you guys probably use those a lot. So he's learning all of that, and he's picking it up as he goes through. Now, as far as astronomy goes, I mean, think about it. He's out there in the frontier. He's working hard all day long. It's nighttime now. There's no smartphones. There's no Google. There's no electric light. In fact, there's no light at all, except for like a fireplace and candles and starlight and the moons. And they're exhausted from physically working hard all day. So, his friends, his teenagers, they have nothing else to do. They just kind of hang out and look at the stars, contemplate the universe, right? So we have at least one visual proof that Lincoln spent a lot of time staring at the stars. So probably recognize this from the original Star Trek series. It's called The Savage Curtain was the episode. So Lincoln, maybe this part isn't true. I don't know. But Lincoln did spend a lot of time looking at the stars. And we know that he studied some of these astronomy books. So we have to thank William Herndon, who was Lincoln's law partner for 15 years before he became president. And William Herndon was a bookaholic. He would get all of these books, get thousands of books, and most of them would be stored in the office that he shared with Lincoln. And he tells us one book I know that he read is this New and Easy System of Geography and Popular Astronomy by John O'Neill, which came out in 1812 originally. So Herndon says, he definitely was looking at that one. And we know that he looked at this one as well, Introduction to Astronomy by Denison Olmsted, who you've probably heard about, because there was an auction copy sold at auction in 1926 where Lincoln had signed his copy of the book, and it was demonstrated it was Lincoln's signature. And another one that we're pretty sure Lincoln looked at was The Recent Progress in Astronomy by Elias Loomis. This came out a little later in the mid 1850s. But he had one of his colleagues out on the circuit. He would ride around the central Illinois for 3 months in the spring and 3 months in the fall, doing lawyer work, legal work, and going to the different county offices. And one of the lawyers that went along with him said, oh, he was always reading this astronomy. We don't know specifically which one it was, but probably this one, because this one was one of the books that Herndon sold in his auction. So after Lincoln died, William Herndon ran into some financial trouble. He had a bit of a drinking problem, and he sold off 1,000 of his books, of just a portion of his books. So he sold off 1,000 of them, and this is one of the ones he sold. So we're pretty sure this is the one that Lincoln was reading. We do know also that he was reading this Annual of Scientific Discovery. And this was, it was a yearbook of fact on science and art. It came out starting in 1850 and ran through 1870 or 1871. We know he looked at this because in the middle of the 1850s, Herndon was reading one. He had just bought this new volume, and he was reading this, and Lincoln asked him, well, what are you reading? So Herndon explains to him, it's all these summaries of all the scientific things. So Lincoln immediately reads through the introduction, starts skimming through these summaries. So what this was is every year there would be a summary, some very short summaries, abstracts, whatever, of all of the scientific research that was being done in the United States, but also in Britain and in France and in Germany, which is where most of the hardcore science work was being done at the time. And these summaries covered every kind of science. There was some biology, there was chemistry, physics, some other natural sciences, and astronomy. So Lincoln was excited about this when he saw it. He goes, this comes out yearly? So he tells Herndon, go get all the back issues. And Herndon ran out and he bought all the back issues. And then he just kept buying them every single year, even after Lincoln went to Washington and after Lincoln was dead. He just kept buying these because he was so interested in them. But Lincoln would tell him, it's like, I love this stuff because, I can read through this. Sometimes I think all these scientific things and I think about a scientific way to do something. And I don't know if I'm right because there's no way to check it. So this he liked because it told about the successes of the research, but also the failures, things that didn't work so well. And there were articles in there, summaries of work being done by Louis Agassiz and all sorts of scientists. There were a lot of patent information. It was a bibliography of recent scientific publications. So there was a lot of information in here. And although it's unlikely that he read them cover to cover every time he got one, he certainly would have been going through these and picking and choosing what he liked. And he obviously was interested in astronomy. So that astronomy interest really got started pretty early. So this is a site that I've probably never seen in my life. The Milky Way. I live in Washington, D.C. I've always lived along the 95 corridor in northeast Northeast US, except when I was living in Europe. And there's too much light pollution. You can never see this. The best I've come to this is in Botswana and down to Luru. And maybe I'll see it. I'm going to Mongolia in the fall. Maybe I'll see it there. The southern ones, of course, have all the southern constellations. But Lincoln was able to see this because there was no light pollution out in the frontier at that time, which must have been great. So Lincoln, in around 1826, he's only about 17 years old. They're living in southern Indiana. He is out there kind of sitting on the banks of the Ohio River in southern Indiana with Anna Roby, who goes by the name of Kate, who's a couple years younger. And they're looking at the moon. And she's like, oh, I'm totally in awe of how the moon is like going down. And Lincoln, of course, doesn't have a romantic bone in his body at this point. So he gets into this very scientific discourse on planets. And he starts telling her, he goes, well, that's not so. The moon doesn't really go down. It just seems like it's going down, And he goes on to explain that the Earth turns from west to east, and the revolution of the Earth carries us under, as it were. So we do the sinking, and the moon is pretty much comparatively still. It just looks like it's sinking, only in appearance. This is pretty rudimentary from our perspective, but that's a lot more than a lot of people knew. And in fact, Kate Roby said, well, I think Abe understood the general laws of astronomy and movements of the heavenly bodies. And she said, well, I think this is because he just reads a lot more than everybody else. He was a learned boy amongst us unlearned folk. Basically, remember that this is 1826 in the frontier of southern Indiana, which had just barely been a state for 10 years at that point. Most of it wasn't even settled. He doesn't have access to a lot of education or books at this point, and yet he does have some basic understanding of this, and he's way more literate than and educated than the people around him. So that's when he's fairly young. Now later, when he's a lawyer, he's now on the banks of Lake Michigan in Chicago, and he's walking along with Adeline Judd, who is the wife of Norman Judd, who is another lawyer that he did the circuit with. He's somebody who was very, very good friends with Lincoln, and they were in Chicago because they were working on a case together in Chicago. So he's walking along the water, and she says that, well, he is talking about the mysteries and the poetry and the beauty of the stars. So like now he gets romantic he's walking with the wife of his good friend. But he still goes into this discourse, and she says, well, he starts talking about it. He talks about the discovery since the invention of the telescope. So it's thrown a flood of light of knowledge on what was before incomprehensible and mysterious. Talked about the computation scientists were making to measure all of this on endless space, which separated the planets in our solar system from our central sun, and our sun from the other suns, which are now gemming the heavens above us with their resplendent beauty. So she's being a little poetic too, as she's remembering this. But this is quite a bit higher level understanding than it was when in the first time. He understands that Earth is just one of several planets in the solar system, and that the solar system revolves around the sun, and that the sun is a star, just like and it's just like all these other stars flickering in the sky. Those are also suns, and you can see how big ours is, and so it must be like pretty far away. So he's understanding better here. And she says he even speculated on what the increased power of the lens might help astronomers discover in the centuries to come. So this was Lincoln's thinking again, this kind of scientific-y thinking. He always was trying to think beyond today. So he understood that the telescope had advanced over the years, obviously a long time since Galileo, to this point even and beyond. And he thinks about, well, here's a problem, how do we fix it? How do we make it better? How do we investigate this better? And this is the same kind of thinking that got him the patent, because he's the only president with a patent at that point, and still, he came up with a way. He saw boats that were getting stuck in low water, and he came up with a system for raising boats over shoals, and he got a patent for it. So he's thinking along these lines. So there's one case that's important when it comes to astronomy. So he had over 5,000 cases, and maybe half of them, especially at the beginning, were very simple. They were divorce cases, they were land disputes, they were debt cases. But then, especially in the 1850s, he was doing more and more patent and technology cases. And he was doing some murder cases, about 17 murder cases. And one of them is called the Almanac Trial. And you'll see why in a second. So this happened in Beardstown. This is 1857. It's only a few years before he became president. He's in Beardstown, Illinois, which is about kind of southwest in Illinois. And the Beardstown courthouse where he tried this case still exists. I went there. This painting is on the wall. You can go. It's a museum now. And this painting shows Lincoln showing this book to the jurors. And you zoom in on it. It's an almanac. Hence the Almanac Trial. So the basic idea of this trial is that Duff Armstrong and James Norris were arrested and for murdering a guy by the name of James Metzger. And Norris was tried right away separately, and he was found guilty and sent to jail. When it came time for Duff Armstrong's term, Lincoln stepped in because Duff Armstrong is the son of Hannah and Jack Armstrong that Lincoln was very, very good friends with out in New Salem years and years ago. And if you've heard anything about Lincoln and wrestling, you've heard about Lincoln's famous wrestling match with Jack Armstrong. And depending on which version you listen to, either Lincoln won or Jack won, or it was a tie. But in any case, that's the Jack Armstrong. Now he's passed away by this point, but Hannah's still there. So Lincoln says, don't worry about it. I'm going to take this case pro bono. I'm pretty sure I can get him off of this murder case. So the trial revolves around really one eyewitness who says from 150 feet away, I very clearly, by the light of a bright moon, it was as clear as day, the middle of day, I was able to see Duff Armstrong hit Metzger in the head, in the side of the head, with a slingshot. And a slingshot, just kind of picture a sock with 2 or 3 rolls of quarters in it. Whacked him with that in the side of the head, and Metzger died. And Lincoln starts thinking, you could see this from 150 feet away. And the guy's like, yeah. It was a bright moon. It's like the middle of the day. So Lincoln takes his astronomy knowledge and he says, let me check. And he goes to an almanac, looks back to that date, and he shows the jury. He said, well, that night, the moon was actually fairly low in the sky. And by the time this all happened, around 11:30, midnight, it was actually on its way to setting. So it wasn't a bright, like the middle of the day. It's obviously not lit up like you say it was from 150 feet away. And there was enough doubt that he created that the jury acquitted Duff Armstrong. So Lincoln used his knowledge to get off somebody who was accused of murder. Never found out what happened to Norris, whether he was able to get off as well. So there are several other times celestial events that Lincoln observed, or we think he observed. One is the Leonid meteor showers of 1833. I'm going to come back to that later when I talk about Lincoln in the White House, because he has a great story from that. He may have seen Miss Mitchell's comet in 1847. We're not entirely sure about that, but he would have been in the right place. Miss Mitchell, you probably know as Maria Mitchell, who became the very first female professor of astronomy at Vassar College in Massachusetts after it opened, when it first opened, which was 1861, right around the time the Civil War was starting. So we're not quite sure about that. We do know that he saw Donati's comet in 1858, because this was the time when he was debating Stephen A. Douglas in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So they did 7 joint debates, and then separately they each did like dozens of other speeches separately. They did 7 debates. And the night before the debate in Jonesboro, which is in the very southern part of Illinois, there was Donati's comet. And we know that Lincoln saw it because a guy by the name of Horace White, very young, 24 years old, he was the reporter for the Chicago Press and Tribune. And he was with Lincoln. He's kind of following Lincoln along on all these other speeches and the debates. And he said, well, we saw this comet. And it says, Mr. Lincoln was greatly admired this strange visitor. And he and I sat for an hour or more in front of the hotel looking at it. So we know that he was looking at Donati's comet, and there's probably some others that he was looking at as well. Now, let me talk about John Quincy Adams for a minute, for a few reasons. John Quincy Adams, of course, was the 6th president of the United States, only had 1 term, couldn't get reelected as president, but he got Massachusetts, said, I'm not finished. Put me in the House of Representatives, which is very unusual for a former president. So he served in the House of Representatives for Massachusetts for almost 20 years. And the end of that overlap with Lincoln. And I mentioned him for a couple of reasons. One, he had this religious promotion of astronomical observatories. He gave this huge speech in 1843 talking about the practical value of astronomy. And because he was a little bit more religious, he reminded humanity to always look heavenward, as if that was our special purpose of our creation, was observing the stars. And a lot of people credited him with helping to stimulate the study of astronomy in America. It was obviously being done elsewhere. So you people probably know this better than I do, how much he was involved. But there's another reason why I wanted to mention John Quincy Adams, and that's because of the Smithsonian Institution. We probably only have that because of him. When James Smithson, the British peer, died, and he left all this money to the United States, and he said, I want you to create a scientific organization called the Smithsonian Institution. He said, I'm giving you money, you got to name it after me, to study science and to disseminate all this knowledge to everyone. There were a lot of people in the United States that said, free money, we don't want it, because it's the British. We fought 2 wars against these people, right? We don't want to take their money. Then there was the South, and a lot of them didn't like the idea of the federal government getting their hands on a lot of money. And it was a lot of money at the time, a lot of money, because they didn't like the federal government getting too powerful and too influential, because the more powerful and influential the federal government got, the more likely it was that they could get rid of slavery. And by 1820 and beyond, that was like the primary driver of every decision that the South ever made. So John Quincy Adams in the House was the one who convinced everybody, yes, we're going to take this money, we'll build a Smithsonian. And it was very important to Lincoln during the Civil War. Joseph Henry, who was the first secretary of the Smithsonian, became an informal science advisor to Lincoln during the war. And the Smithsonian was very important. And there's one more reason I wanted to mention John Quincy Adams. I mentioned they overlapped. So near the end of his almost 20 years, like 18 and a half years, John Quincy Adams, of course, is getting old. That overlapped with Lincoln's one term in the House of Representatives. Lincoln started a term in like November, December, he gets there, and John Quincy Adams dies of a massive stroke and dies right on the House floor, just feet from Abraham Lincoln. And the House, if you ever been to the statuary hall in the Capitol, that was the House floor. It's not very big, and Lincoln has long legs. It wasn't very far to get from one side to the other. So he was close when Adams died. In fact, he was on Adams's funeral committee. We don't have specific information that they talked to each other, but almost certainly they did. I mean, Adams was the head of leading the Whig party, and Lincoln was the Whig, and there weren't many Whigs in Congress at the time. He was a sciencey guy. Lincoln was a sciencey guy. He was interested in astronomy. Lincoln was interested in astronomy. They were right close to each other. So I think they had to talk. Lincoln was invited and introduced himself to everybody. And he pretty much knew everybody else that was there in the Congress at the time. So he must have talked to Adams. Okay, so that was when he was in Congress in 1847, the early 1849. 1861, he gets elected president. This is what the White House looked like at the time. There was no East and West Wing on the White House, which is kind of getting like what it is today. There's no East Wing in the White House. There's a big hole where it used to be. But this statue was of Thomas Jefferson. And he was also a sciencey guy. This was a statue that was sitting in front of the White House that was put there by James K. Polk before Lincoln went, and then was removed when Grant was president and moved into Statuary Hall. And one of the reasons I like Statuary Hall is because Lincoln created it. That room that's now Statuary Hall was the House of Representatives when Lincoln was in Congress. By the time he became president, they had added on the wings with the new House wing and the new Senate wing because they had more senators, more states. They needed more space, and that room was kind of empty. And so Lincoln and others in people in the Congress talked, and they said, "Well, what do we do with it?" And so, "Well, why don't we put statues in there?" So they decided to make it statuary hall and put all these statues, and the Jefferson statue got put in there. And there's a little, you go in there now, there's a little, it's still there. You go in there now, there's a little brass plate on the floor. So this is where Lincoln's desk was. I'm pretty proud of that room, of that space, because there's a room that's off of that you just walk through a door from Statuary Hall, which is now called the Lincoln Room, because it used to be the post office when Lincoln was there. And I was one of many people in a group that helped get that dedicated as the Lincoln Room. So Lincoln had something to do with Statuary Hall. But while Lincoln was president, obviously there's a war going on. It's very stressful. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of science and technology development going on. And Lincoln would get exhausted. He would get tired. And so to relax, he would go down the road, down along what is now Constitution Avenue, to see the Old Navy Observatory. It wasn't called the Old Navy at the time, it was called Naval Observatory. But you can see this building here and the round piece here, that's the Naval Observatory. And they give you an idea of where this is. This is a picture from 1936. So it's got a bunch of buildings that weren't there at the time. But this was there, and this is still there. If you follow the observatory down this line, that's going south, and you run into the Lincoln Memorial. And this building in the corner here, that's about where the Institute of Peace is right now. If you follow along the top edge of this picture, that's 23rd Street, and Constitution Ave is vertical on this right side. So that'll give you an idea of where it is. He would go down there to look at the stars. And this observatory is still there. And you can go see it. Or you can't really go see it. It's still there. But this was used during Lincoln's time. It was a naval hospital at the time, and then it was the first place where National Institutes of Health were before it moved to Bethesda. Right now, it's the last 5 or 10 years, it's being used by the State Department. It's taken it over. State Department is just across 23rd Street from it. And it's all fenced off, and there's guards. I mean, you basically can't get in there without a pass now. But you can, if you get the right angle, you can see it. So Lincoln would go down there during the war to look through this telescope. And we know he went down to look at this telescope, look through this telescope, because we have some reports of him going, and we know they probably went a lot more than the reports we have left. So we know that in May of 1863, Lincoln went down there with Major General Daniel Butterfield, who was a Civil War general. He was somebody that Lincoln had known for a long time in Illinois. And they went down and they looked at the stars. And then Lincoln went back 3 months later because they just installed I think this is it at least, 9.6-inch telescope at the observatory. This is all the old Naval Observatory down near Constitution Avenue. So he would go and he would look at this. And he went there and he met up with Asaph Hall, who was an astronomer and was working at the Naval Observatory at the time. So Asaph Hall showed Lincoln how to find the star Arcturus, which is a pretty bright star, and he showed him how to find it. And Asaph Hall comes back into play here in a minute. There was also another time where another friend from Illinois was in town, and Lincoln says, "Come on by, we'll go up to the observatory and we'll look at the moon." And so this guy, Joseph Gillespie, shows up, and unfortunately, it was a very overcast night. It's very cloudy. And as we we're just talking about, sometimes it's just not good weather for observing. So it ended up getting called off after he got there. But, he went down there other times. And then there were, he also reportedly had a small telescope in the White House. And he could look out the window of the White House. look over what is now like the ellipse and the grassy area and the ellipse, it would be the stump of the Washington Monument, because that was only about a third built, and it would stay that way for a long couple of decades. You could see the Washington Canal, which before the mall was there, it was a canal, and it was like this pestilent-filled, smelly place, especially during a war with all the soldiers there. He could look over across the canal at the Smithsonian Castle, which was the only Smithsonian building at the time. If you look further, you look out over the Potomac, and then on the other side of the Potomac, on the hill, was Robert E. Lee's old house that he had given up when he joined the South, beginning of the Civil War. And that house is now Arlington House. It's still there. It's part of the Arlington National Cemetery. So he could look out just from the smaller telescope he had in the White House. Now, not long after Lincoln, within a decade, they upgraded to a 26-inch telescope, which is this. And Asaph Hall used this telescope to discover the moons of Mars in 1877. So he discovered Phobos and Deimos. He also discovered, he noticed a speck that in front of Saturn, and it turns out later that was, you could figure out that that was a moon, one of Saturn's moons. He did a lot of research on stars and all sorts of things that you guys would know about that are beyond me. But he was a big astronomer researcher that stayed for quite a long time after the war and got into this bigger telescope. Now, this picture is actually taken from the telescope after it was moved up to the new Naval Observatory. So 2 or 3 miles north of the old observatory is a new observatory, and there's a big complex that includes the vice president's residence. It's up off of Massachusetts Avenue, and you can see the entrance to it, but you can't go in unless you got a pass. So I want to talk about this because this is, I mentioned the Leonid meteor storm, November 12th to 13th, 1833. And I love this picture because this is an engraving, a woodcut engraving done by Adolf Vollmer, like 50 years after the event, based on a painting done by an artist that was in turn based on a first-person account of this 1833 storm. And it looks pretty spectacular, right? It's got to be, it's like overestimating the number of stars, right? But this was a pretty massive storm. It was described as like the night the stars fell. It was a huge storm. People talk about fiery snowflakes, and just picture there were 50,000 to 150,000 shooting stars per hour. I can't even picture that, but this is about what I would think I would see if that's what was happening. And it was scary to a lot of people, especially out in the farms where they didn't have a lot of education, didn't know what astronomy was. And it was caused by Earth passing through the tail of the comet Tempel-Tuttle, which didn't actually get the name Tempel-Tuttle until later. They officially discovered it independently. Temple in December 1865 and Tuttle in January 1866. So it's like within a month or two of each other. And that's how it got named. It's called 55P for you people like numbers and designations like that. But this was what Lincoln was exposed to. And there's a story while Lincoln is in the White House, he has he remembers back to when he experienced seeing this. Remember, this is pretty scary, 1833 out in the frontier. So the story is actually provided to us by Walt Whitman, who wrote about it much later. And he says, well, during the worst part of the war, the gloomiest part of the war, Lincoln was visited by a delegation of bank presidents who were all very concerned that the Union was going to end and the war was going to destroy the economy and they were going to lose their money. Basically, it was probably the driving force. But anyway, they thought everything was going to end, that the Union would end. And they went in and they asked Lincoln, and Lincoln says, this reminds me of a story. Lincoln did that a lot. So he said, you know, back when I was a young man in Illinois, says I boarded for a time with a deacon of a Presbyterian church. And one night he was aroused from my sleep by a rap on the door. And he wakes up and the deacon is yelling, "Arise, arise, Abraham." Says the day of judgment has come. People think about this is the end of days. This is the end of the world. And Lincoln, who is not one to, you know, overreact. He's when somebody thinks things through. He looks up at the sky and he's like, there's just showers of these of stars coming down. And he thinks and he stares at it a little closer and he says, you know what? I can see in the heavens all of the grand old constellations which I've been so well acquainted. So he could see that, hey, the constellations are still there. He understood the stars weren't actually following, or there was something else. I don't know how much he knew it was a comet, but he tells the story to these bankers, and then he says, "Gentlemen, the world did not come to an end then, nor will the Union now." So hopefully they went away feeling a little better. Now I know I've been talking for a while, and it's getting late, so I'm going to end with one more slide. So Lincoln was, I would call him a casual interest in astronomy. He didn't study astronomy. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't, you know, he had a lot of other things he was doing, right? So he was kind of a casual. His son Robert got into it more. So Robert Lincoln, later in life, after he's made a name for himself on his own, he builds a cottage, a summer home up in Manchester, Vermont, that he calls Hildene. And this summer home has 24 rooms, and he has about 15 servants that wait on him and his family. And it's called Hildene because the house sits on a hill overlooking a little valley, which is Dean is a valley, is a Scottish word for valley. So he sits on a hill overlooking it. So this would be a great place to put an observatory. Because Lincoln, you know, he was sort of into it. Robert got really into it. And that's what Robert kind of did. You know, Lincoln was interested in math. Robert used to do math problems just for fun, just to relax. You know, Lincoln was a surveyor for a while. Robert learned surveying and surveyed this whole building of this whole house and the observatory and everything up in Vermont. You know, Lincoln was into astronomy. Lincoln became more or less hardcore astronomy for somebody who wasn't an astronomer. So he built this observatory. Now it's not huge. It's about maybe 12 feet across, 20 feet or so tall, and sits on the hill overlooking the valley. It has excellent views. And in there is this telescope. And this telescope is the actual telescope that's there now is the one that Robert looked through. And it looks like a 9.6-inch telescope to me. I mean, you guys probably know better. You can't use it anymore. It's got a little fence in front of it, but you can look at it. And it did travel a little bit after Robert died. It traveled around. It was in museums for a while, but eventually it made its way back because Robert's family continued to live in this Hildene all the way up till 1975, when his granddaughter Peggy finally died living at Hildene. So it's almost entirely still things that Robert kept there and Peggy kept there, and Peggy didn't renovate much. So, you know, Lincoln, we talked about those 3 astronomy books that Lincoln read. Robert's library today has 30 astronomy books still there, and we don't know if any have been lost over the years. So he was more hardcore about it than Lincoln was, and really got into it. And he was telling a friend near the end, he says, you know, I belong to the class of old, young amateurs in astronomy. Yeah, but I enjoy my study of it very much. And he was very much more into it than Lincoln. So it came down from Lincoln and stuck with his son. So I will end there because I've been talking for a while, and stop sharing, which is already done. And I'll take any questions if you have any.
All right, let's give Mr. Ken a round of applause for his talk. Well, like he said, are there any questions pertaining to what we talked about?
I'm sorry, I was switching over to the headphones. Can you repeat that?
I was just asking the crowd if they had any questions that they'd like to ask you real quick. Okay,
Yeah, I still didn't quite get it.
great job. So, hey, Crystal, how's it going? We'll wave to you on the Zoom.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time catching what you're saying. I think it's because it's a bigger room.
Here, I'm gonna do this. I can move back. Well, David, since we don't have any questions, we'd like to thank you for your time, and we'll go ahead and finish out the rest of the meeting.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much again, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Very much appreciate it. I will take myself off of host before I go. If I can do that.
Yeah, go back to the first slide.